Welcome back to Play and Trade Guitars. I'm John, that's Zach behind the camera, and this is Play and Trade Guitars, where we play it and trade it. We teamed up with the Martin Guitar Company in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. Zach and I flew there for a factory tour and a museum tour. And today, Jason Ahner, who manages the Martin Museum, is going to give you a behind-the-glass experience and walk the floor of the museum with us. You're going to get to see and hear this priceless collection of guitars at the Martin Museum. You'll get the full history from Jason. He'll take them out from behind glass so that we can play them, and it's just an unbelievable experience. I'm so excited to share with you. At the top, make sure you subscribe. We're giving away this Martin D28 to one of you when we hit 100,000 subscribers. To win, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and use our entry link in the description. And if you're in the market for any new gear like this beautiful Martin D28, click to buy new gear using our link. You're going to get easy payment plans, and it supports us directly so we can keep bringing you great content like the Martin Museum Tour. Check out our factory tour, get comfortable, grab yourself a beverage, and get ready for this long play experience as Jason walks the museum floor with us. Let's do it. I can't wait to show you.
Now, just as a precursor, I'm gonna just estimate that you're probably gonna play about $2 million worth of guitars today. Here we have the Holy Grail. I mean, this guitar wasn't owned by anybody famous, but because of what it is, we insured it $500,000. So, wanna play the Holy Grail?
Let's do it.
Eric Clapton, Kurt Cobain.
Les Paul's Martin. Wrap your head around that one.
We are the oldest stringed instrument builder in the world. In this case here, we have the oldest Martin guitar known to exist. And the fact that Leo Fender worked on this guitar before he started building the Telecaster and then the Stratocaster, it's pretty wild.
This is why Martin is the American guitar company, you know?
This was owned by Kurt Cobain, you know, played by Kurt Cobain and played by Elliott Smith. So some really great history with this guitar. When else are you gonna say you got a chance to play Kurt Cobain's guitar?
Jason, thanks so much for being here.
You're welcome. First, I wanted to thank you for coming and visiting us. I know we've met a couple times before, yes. But you know, now you get to come here, check out our museum and factory, and you know, we're definitely excited to have you here.
Thank you very much. So
if you want to follow me, we're going to start, you know, where the story of the company starts. C.F. Martin Sr. was born in Markneukirchen, Germany in 1796. So his father was a cabinet maker by trade. And what he was mostly building, you know, obviously furniture, but he was building a lot of violin cases because Markneukirchen was known for their stringed instrument building. But Christian's father was also one of the earliest guitar builders in Germany at that time. And as Christian was getting older, his father saw he had more of an interest in building guitars than he did furniture. So he went to the Violin Makers Guild in Markneukirchen and asked them if they had any interest in building guitars, and they were like, nah, you know, we think the guitar is a passing fad, we're gonna stick with violins. So I mean, luckily for us, they were wrong, but he had to come up with a different idea, and what he did was he arranged for Christian to apprentice under Johann Stauffer in Vienna, Austria. Mm-hmm. So Stauffer was pretty much the best known guitar builder in Europe at that time. And when Christian was around 15, he left home, went to study with Stauffer, eventually met his future wife, Ottilie Kuhl, there. Mm-hmm. They got married, moved back to Markneukirchen, and the dream was they were going to set up their home and shop and live happily ever after. Mm-hmm. But what happened was the guild system. And by that point, the Violin Makers Guild saw the potential in the guitar.
Oh.
So there was constant court battles because they were trying to stop the cabinet makers from building guitars, but every time the court sided with the cabinet makers because the guitars Christian was building were the best they had ever seen. So this goes on for a number of years, and finally Martin's like, you know what, I've had enough of this. I need, you know, more freedom. So in September of 1833, his family and him board a ship in Bremen, Germany, and they arrive in New York City November 6th of 1833. So
which almost to the day.
Exactly. So, you know,
190
today.
years?
Yep. So Monday, goodness. November 6th will be exactly 190 years
wow.
that Martin has been in the United States.
Wow.
Yeah. So pretty big accomplishment. You know, we are the oldest stringed instrument builder in the world. Yeah. The oldest guitar builder. We're also the oldest ukulele builder. So, you know, a couple of huge milestones there. Now, we know from our ledgers that we have that Martin went to work right away. Obviously, they had to set up the home and shop and things like that. But we know, you know, he came to work, he came to build guitars, And in this case here, we have the oldest Martin guitar known to exist. So this guitar is from around May of 1834. And obviously it has all of the trademarks of that Stauffer style instrument, you know, the figure 8 body shape, the violin influence with the maple back and sides. If you can get a shot of that right there.
Oh, wow.
That is the C.F. Martin New York stamp. So you might find guitars that look like this, but if they don't have that stamp, they weren't built by Martin. Every instrument Martin built would be stamped C.F. Martin, New York, C.F. Martin and Company, New York, or C.F. Martin and Company, Nazareth, Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And usually you find those stamps on models with the Stauffer head or any model with the maple neck with the ice cream cone heel be stamped at the back of the body like that. Mm-hmm. Now, models with the Spanish style neck would be stamped on the back of the headstock.
Okay.
And you'd also find it stamped on the majority of models on the inside of the body.
Okay.
So a lot of the items on this guitar were patented by Stauffer, like the headstock shape, the tuning gears, the clock key mechanism that you can use to adjust the neck. So if you look, the entire fingerboard floats over the top of the neck, so you can raise and lower.
Oh, wow.
So it's kind of like an early truss rod in a way.
Sure. Amazing, incredible. And that is just known as the Stauffer headstock, right?
Yes.
That kind of sticks on a side.
Yeah, a Viennese Stauffer headstock,
Yeah.
and like I said, it was something that was patented by him. The majority of the early German guitars and Austrian guitars had a mustache-style bridge like this with some decorative inlay. The nickel silver fret wire saddle instead of ivory or bone like you know, most guitars have now, or some form of like Tusk or Micarta, some form of plastic. But I mean, it's just amazing that, you know, this guitar is 189 years old, and you know, the shape that it's in. And what always blows my mind is how precisely it was built. You know, thinking back, there was no power equipment, no electricity, just, you know, all of that handwork involved, and
Unbelievable.
just amazing.
Unbelievable. And it's kind of, I mean, you can't overstate how popular the guitar became at this point, right? I mean, in Europe and even in America, I'm sure they traveled throughout America, but some of the greatest guitar composers ever were living, what, 1830s, 1840s? And so originally, I mean, I guess, not to state the obvious, but obviously he would originally be copying kind of a Spanish guitar style.
Well, originally he was building this Viennese style.
Viennese style.
And then one of the things that Martin was doing in New York City was repairing instruments. So he saw how popular Spanish-built guitars were.
Okay.
And so he started to emulate those designs.
Okay.
So we'll see
that's
as
even
we
a
get
step
further
later.
in the museum. And it's very quickly that it happens. You know, they arrive in 1833, and by the end of the 1830s, he's starting to build guitars with a Spanish shape and Spanish headstock and neck. So that evolution really didn't take that long, because one of the things we know about C.F. Martin Sr. was he was always in the pursuit of the perfect guitar. And obviously he wanted to be able to sell that guitar, and he saw that building Spanish-style guitars would allow him to sell more than building these Viennese-style instruments.
Okay. Sound. Too much. Wow, the craftsmanship is just unbelievable. Even the etching in this back plate of the headstock is unbelievable.
And I mean, a lot of those are unique. Like, we have a couple of them on display here, and it's like the pattern on them is like almost all that I've seen, the pattern etched into the back is different. So the Martin family never really felt at home in New York City. You know, New York City's New York City, even back in the 1830s. Have you ever seen the movie Gangs of New York?
Yes.
So that's kind of what you picture in your mind, and they just didn't like that.
Yeah.
They actually had thought about moving back to Germany at one point, but they had a family friend that moved to the Nazareth area a couple years after the Martin family arrived in the United States, and Christian's wife went to visit them, and so she wrote home to her husband and said, this place is great. There's a large German-speaking population, rolling countryside, it reminds me of Germany, we need to move here. So in 1839, he sold his shop in New York City, and the family moved to Cherry Hill, Pennsylvania, which is about a quarter mile from where our factory is now.
Okay.
And so this period was really creative for C.F. Martin because, one, he wasn't repairing instruments anymore, so he could just concentrate strictly on building guitars. And then two, he was constantly experimenting with things. And one of the experimentations that turned out to be hugely successful for him in the guitar industry was X-bracing. So here we have the earliest known X-brace guitar to exist. It was built for Madame de Goni, who was a very popular Spanish guitarist on the East Coast of the United States. She arrived around 1840. Martin probably became aware of her because of all of his connections in New York. And then in the summer of 1843, she came to visit the Martin family because it was common back then for traveling teachers and musicians to do things like that. Get out of the city during the summer, go to the country for, a retreat.
Sure.
And one of the things about de Goni was she was a Spanish guitarist. So she would only play Spanish-built guitars, which obviously Martin being a guitar builder, that wasn't suitable for him. So according to C.F. Martin's granddaughter, he snuck off with her guitar one night and built this guitar in the exact same, shape, the dimensions. But what is unique about it is it's the first known X-brace guitar.
It's so much earlier than I guess I would have assumed. It's just that the X-brace, because I guess I always associate it with later, but it's
yeah,
that
because
early.
one of the things that Martin found was you fast forward 80 years and it's a perfect bracing pattern for steel strings.
Steel, okay, yeah.
But if you look at Martin's instruments, even a lot of the early German style, Viennese style guitars, he preferred to use a pin bridge, which this guitar has. And a lot of these, there's some he did with a tie block that probably would have been a special order, but the majority of the guitars he used a pin bridge, and there had to be a reason behind it, or he must have preferred the structural stability or the tone with the pin bridge or something. But when Martin started building Spanish-style guitars, he would use fan bracing, like a traditional Spanish-style guitar would have. But one of the issues was using a pin bridge, sometimes he would hit a brace.
Oh. And you can't exactly see
Yeah.
where you're puncturing at that stage, right?
Well, he would know it, and then if it was, a higher grade model, he'd have to remove the top, replace the brace, which was, a lot of work. If it was a lower price model, he may have just let it go.
Okay.
But then in the later 1830s and early 1840s, you see him experimenting with these different bracing patterns that are combining X bracing and fan bracing until finally this guitar is built with X bracing, and that is exactly how the top is braced. A little bit different than the X bracing we use now, but that's the first variation of it. And we did build an authentic based off of this guitar a few years ago, and that X-brace top is a replica that the custom shop made for the museum, just so we could illustrate what that original bracing looked like. Yeah. Wow. If you want to give that a test. Now, just as a precursor, I'm gonna just estimate that you're probably gonna play about $2 million worth of guitars today. That's my guess. Don't be afraid to tune it.
Okay, yeah. I'm holding my breath here.
If the string breaks, it breaks.
It's a little flat, so. I think that's the most I'm sure people say that all the time. That's the most nerve-wracking part, is tuning it up. It's like,
yeah.
I know it. I know it can handle it, but it's just
for a guitar that's 180 years old, it's kind of one of those things but even Chris Martin will tell you these guitars were built to be played.
Yeah.
And that's why we still get them out. And the vast majority of what we have in our collection is playable.
Yeah.
There's a few here and there that we have just because of different reasons, but most of them are playable instruments.
Sure.
So the Martin family, the reason why they didn't move into Nazareth right away was because back when they moved to the area, it was a Moravian-only community. So if you weren't of the Moravian faith, you weren't allowed in town after dark.
Oh.
So that changed in the 1850s, and the Martin family bought a block of property at North and Main Street in Nazareth and built their homes and the factory there. The North Street factory is still open today. We use it for our Guitar Makers Connection, where you can buy parts and kits and supplies, things like that, if you want to build your own guitar or if you're into repairing guitars. So that was a big change, expanded outside of just having a factory at their home. And then slowly, as business starts picking up, they expand the factory. In 1867, C.F. Martin Sr. brings on his son, C.F. Martin Jr., and his nephew, C.F. Hartman, to create C.F. Martin and Company. So like I was talking about before, if you were to look at the early Martin guitars, the earliest guitars would just say C.F. Martin and then New York.
Okay.
So after August of 1867, they would say C.F. Martin and Company, New York. And then finally in 1898 is when the company started stamping Nazareth, PA.
Okay.
And the reason why they waited was they were using distributors out of New York City, so they still identified with the city. And after they stopped using those distributors and started selling on their own, then they were like, these guitars have been built in Nazareth for almost 60 years now. We should start stamping them that way. This is what a workbench would have looked like at the North Street factory. So this is like circa 1920 or so.
Wow.
Now, the tools in the case here and on the back wall, we believe those are the tools that C.F. Martin Sr. brought with him from Germany.
Wow.
Because we know he came with supplies to build. So he had to have brought, wood, tools, all of that with him. Now, 1873, C.F. Martin Sr. dies. His son, C.F. Martin Jr., takes control of the company. Doesn't change too much. He kind of standardizes the lineup a little bit. And he does bring in steam-powered equipment to help modernize the factory. Because even if you look back then in 1880, there were companies like Lion and Healy out of Chicago that were building 100,000 guitars a year.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's what we build now, and people are like, wow, but you go back to 1880 and somebody's building that many.
Wow.
Now Martin, they never really tried to hit that number, but they did want to increase output. They did want to build more efficiently, and that's kind of sets a precedent for how the company is now, because we're always looking to build as efficiently as possible. And that's why we're using CNC machinery and robotics and things like that. And that steam-powered equipment kind of like laid that groundwork for the company to go in that direction. C.F. Martin Jr. dies suddenly in 1888. So his son, Frank Henry, who's only 22 at the time, takes control. And he's a little more outgoing than his father. He wants to grow the company beyond guitars, so his first idea was the mandolin. So mandolins are extremely popular in the 1880s. And so Martin is thinking about building them, and it takes a little while, but they finally get into building mandolins in 1895. And there were a lot of firsts with the mandolin for the company. They were the first Martin instruments to have pick guards, the first to use steel strings, the first to have fingerboard inlay, and the first to have serial numbers and to be built in batches, or what we call shop orders, groups of instruments together.
Oh, okay.
The next opportunity Frank saw was the ukulele. So the origins of the ukulele go back to the island of Madeira off Portugal. And Madeira's chief crop was grapes for wine production. But in the 1870s, there was a famine, and so some of the men left Madeira and ended up in the sugarcane fields of Hawaii, and they brought with them this little 4-string instrument they called the machete. And it very quickly was adopted by the people of Hawaii. They started calling it the ukulele, the bouncing flea, and as Hawaiian music was catching on in the mainland, Martin was getting inquiries from their dealers to build ukuleles, because they were like, you build the best guitars in the world, why don't you try ukuleles? So the company kicked around the idea for a little while, but eventually in the 19-teens, they get into building ukuleles. Specifically 1917 is when they really get into full-scale ukulele production. And then by the mid-1920s, they're building 3 times as many ukuleles as guitars. You play ukulele?
A little bit, but not enough to where you want to hear it. But we can, yeah, sure.
Get something out. So here we have the Contra ukulele. So if you look, right there's a photo of Richard Contra. He was in the United States Navy, and he was also a well-known ukulele composer from Brooklyn. And he volunteered to go on the first expedition of the North Pole with Admiral Byrd, and he became friends with Byrd's pilot, Floyd Bennett. And so he said to Bennett, you know what, I want a souvenir from this trip. Can you smuggle my ukulele on the plane? And so Bennett did it. They make the flight, come back. He gives the ukulele back to Conter. And then Conter has the crew of the ship sign the ukulele. Then there's a reception for them in Washington, D.C. That photo there is in front of the White House. And several dignitaries at the time signed the ukulele. So on here you have Calvin Coolidge, who was the president at the time. On the side you have Thomas Edison.
Yeah, I just saw that.
So this is our reproduction that we were building. This is the original.
Wow.
Down here, very small, is Amelia Earhart.
Oh my goodness.
So this might be the most historically significant instrument in our museum. And he also documented his travels on it. So if you look.
Wow, yes. Left Kings Bay for North Pole, May 9th, 26.
And then Conter eventually volunteered for the expedition on the South Pole, and took the ukulele with him on that as well. So somewhere around 180 signatures on it. And then in 1953, he wrote a letter and sent the letter with the ukulele to Martin Guitar and traded it for a D28. So good investment for us and for him.
Wow. That is unbelievable.
Now, something else that was the result of Hawaiian music was steel string guitar playing. So there were two friends in Honolulu in the 1880s, Joseph Kukuku and Makia Kealakai. And they were the first ones known to string a guitar with steel strings. They took piano wire and then found a railroad tie and started playing the guitar with this bar, and they created Hawaiian style guitar playing. And then when Hawaiian music was extremely popular in the US, it featured ukuleles and a steel string guitar. And so around that time was when Martin got into steel string guitar building. So what's so significant about this little guitar here, this 217, is this is Martin's first guitar only to be offered with steel strings.
Wow.
So up to this point, this was introduced in 1922. Up to then, you can get a guitar with gut strings for what they called Spanish playing, steel strings for Hawaiian playing, or steel strings for Spanish playing. So this was only offered in steel strings for Spanish playing, and it was their least expensive model at the time. So they wanted to help keep the cost down, and one of the factors that went into it was what they called string regulation, or what we now call action. So if they were only offering this guitar one way, they would only have to do that setup one way. So it kind of simplified things. So if you want to.
So obviously higher action on the Hawaiian style guitar, and just underscoring the point that there was a competition for what would become guitar music, whether you played it like this, or, which then this is now kind of considered Spanish, even though it's what we all think of now, but there was kind of a competition at that point for how it would be played.
Exactly.
And that's where the steel strings came from. That's unbelievable. Now that's a beautiful sounding guitar. Fantastic.
Yeah, you can definitely hear the difference in projection from the gut string guitars to steel string. And
I did my best to play the other one finger style too, so that now I got the pick going, so it's not a fair fight.
And I mean, that was a key too when Hawaiian music was becoming very popular because there was the vaudeville circuit, and they were touring on that.
Yeah.
And back then there was no amplification, no microphones, so you needed a guitar to be as loud as possible in order for it to be heard.
Yeah.
Now, are any of you baseball fans?
Fair weather fans, at least for me. Maybe them.
Well, I'd just like to point out this guitar because it's pretty cool. So
wow.
if you look at the photo up there,
Yeah.
you recognize two of those gentlemen. On the left is Lou Gehrig, in the center is Babe Ruth.
I do know that much about baseball.
Yeah.
That is an amazing picture.
So I'm sure you can find baseballs and baseball bats that are signed by both of them, but I'm pretty sure this is the only guitar that both of them signed.
Wow.
So the story behind it is they were campaigning for Al Smith, who was running against Herbert Hoover to be president in 1928. And for some reason, they decided to use this guitar as a promotional item. So the majority of the signatures are radio entertainers from New York City at the time. But if you look right there, that's Babe Ruth's signature.
Unbelievable. How cool.
And right there is Lou Gehrig's.
That's unreal.
Yeah.
So do a lot of these guitars come into this collection through auction, or you end up buying them back, or they're donated, or?
I mean, a little of each.
Yeah.
So we do accept donations if people want to donate guitars to us, or we purchase from auctions, or we purchase from just private individuals looking to, sell what they have.
Sure.
So this one came from a private owner.
Okay. That is wild. That is really cool.
So we get into that period that you were talking about, that change from 12 fret to 14 fret. And that's huge because that is when Martin builds the OM, the orchestra model, that's the first truly modern guitar. Mm-hmm. And so that the first OM is built in 1929. Mm-hmm. And it was built for a banjo player from Georgia named Perry Bechtel.
Okay.
So he was trying to transition from banjo to guitar. I mean, he found archtop guitars that he liked because those had a longer, slimmer neck, but no flat tops because everything was a wider, shorter neck. And so he contacted Martin, and they agreed to build him a 14 fret guitar. I guess they took the profile from one of his archtop necks to make the neck slimmer, and so they build this orchestra model. And so very quickly for Martin, it catches on. They start changing their designs to the 14 fret. And so do pretty much all other guitar manufacturers, and then it becomes the standard for acoustic guitars.
So 14 fret and a slimmer neck. So was the neck thicker because it was emulating more of a Spanish style guitar and there was no truss rod, or just mainly because of the Spanish style with that thicker
it was
neck?
it was the style, because Spanish style classical guitars have a wider neck, so it was really for whatever playing style, because playing a guitar with a pick, it was just kind of getting, just kind of being born at this point.
Right.
I mean, really sophisticated guitar players would play fingerstyle and, so they would want the wider fingerboard, but once you see that the pick being involved and guitar playing, the style start to change, that's when you would want, that slimmer neck.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So here we have a 1930 Ohm 45 Deluxe.
Is this a 25.4 scale? Is that the full scale?
Yep, this is a 25.4. So triple O's would have been 24.9, OMs would have been 25.4. And the way that Martin determined that was usually their largest body size would be the longer scale. So if you go back to the 1800s, when a double O was the biggest size they built, those would have been built with the longer scale.
Oh, really?
So, Frank Henry Martin just was so familiar with the double O and that scale length. When Martin builds, the orchestra model or, dreadnoughts and things like that, he makes notes double O scale on it.
Oh.
But usually when they would introduce the larger body size, they would give, the smaller sizes would be the short scale, and then the larger size would be the long scale. So the characteristics of the OM is the 25.4 scale length and a 1 3/4 nut width.
Okay.
So this is, like I said, a 1930 OM 45 Deluxe. Only 11 were built in 1930, so it might be the rarest guitar in our collection. And if you want to try that out.
Sure. And so it's kind of got those banjo style tuners, huh?
This was before Martin was using the Grover, kind of the standard guitar tuners as they're pretty much known now.
that is yeah. I mean, that full tone coming out of that's an evolution in sound.
Yeah.
That wasn't heard in the last one, as beautiful as that is. That's something different.
I mean, this is, definitely fills the room a little bit more.
Unbelievable.
So Martin is really known for the dreadnought. I think when a lot of people think of an acoustic guitar, they think of the D18, the D28, and where that all starts is with the Ditson Company. So back in the 19-teens, Martin was building an exclusive line for Ditson that had this different shape to it. And I had mentioned his name before, Makia Kealakai. Well, Martin, he was very fond of Martin guitars, and so they built a guitar for him that was larger than a triple O, because he was on the vaudeville circuit and needed to be heard. And so Ditson became aware of this larger guitar and asked Martin to build them something, but in their special shape. So they're like, yeah, we can do that. So they build this really big guitar, and they're not sure what to call it, because before then, all of their guitars followed the number system, like a size 5 or a size 2. So it was World War I era, and the largest warships at the time were the HMS Dreadnoughts from the British Navy, and so they decided to borrow the name of the warship for the guitar.
Okay.
So that's when you look at a D18 or a D28, the D stands for Dreadnought. Now in here we have what the original Dreadnought looked like. So this is a Ditson 111. So this is the original style Dreadnought. It's kind of similar to a D18 with a spruce top and mahogany back and sides. As you can see, it's that very big 12 fret design.
Yeah.
That longer body, the shorter, wider neck, but I mean, the guitar just sounds magnificent if you want to give it a try.
Sure, please. Sound.
You can tell they're getting louder and more projecting every time we notch it down just a little bit more.
I mean, because that's the key to that sound, is the larger you build the body, I mean, it's all about the air traveling around and then coming out the sound hole. So the larger the body, the more air you get into it, pushing sound out. And obviously the tone woods come into play. I mean, pretty much back then, either Martins had an Adirondack spruce top, they were building guitars with koa tops or mahogany tops, and then the back and the sides were mahogany, Brazilian rosewood, or koa. But I mean, really, mahogany and rosewood were the key woods for dreadnoughts.
Sure.
So the early dreadnought sales were kind of slow. Martin was only building the dreadnought for Ditson until Ditson went out of business. In 1930. Then in 1931, Martin starts building the dreadnought under its own name. Originally, there was the D1 and the D2, which were pretty much a D18 and a D28. I mean, they built them exclusively, the D1 and D2, for the Chicago Musical Instrument Company. But then when they were building the D18 and the D28, they offered it to all their dealers. Now, what really set the popularity of the dreadnought into motion was in 1934, they switched from the big 12 fret design to the orchestra model design, gave the dreadnought a 14 fret, slimmer neck, and that's where you really see it start to take off with early country and bluegrass musicians. Now, here we have the Holy Grail, 1942 D45. So pre-war D45s, there were only 91 built. Pretty much the most collectible flat top guitars ever made.
So D1, D2, D18, D28, primary difference would be mahogany on the 1 and 18 back and sides, rosewood on the 2 or 28.
I mean, obviously you get into the appointment levels, like the 28s had the herringbone trim and things like that, but 28s have always been rosewood. I mean, style 28s go back to before the Civil War. So, I mean, that combination of rosewood back and sides, the spruce top, that herringbone inlay, you know, that can be traced back to the 1850s. But, so style 45s didn't come about until 1904. And when Martin started building the D45, you know, that was really their flagship model. And especially when they switched to the 14 fret design. So there were only 91 built, and that's combining 12 fret and 14 fret. And so these, I mean, just because of what they are, I mean, this guitar wasn't owned by anybody famous, but because of what it is, we insured it $500,000. Wow. Just because of how, you know, rare and collectible it is. And anytime you see a D45, a pre-war D45 come up for sale, they're usually well into six figures. Wow. So, sure. Play the Holy Grail?
Let's do it. That's the sound right there.
And that's why the Martin Dreadnought is what it is today, that sound.
Unreal. That is the sound right there. Oh my goodness.
So the Depression, you know, it hit Martin like it hit other companies in the US. So sales started slowing down, and they wanted to come up with ways to try to boost sales. So that's when they introduced archtop guitars and started spraying sunburst finishes to try to compete with companies like Gibson and Epiphone. But by the time World War II rolled around, I mean, the majority of the models in this case were discontinued, either because they took longer to build or took more materials, or, you know, just didn't sell. It's one of the things that the company has seen over the years is that people really want their flat top Martin guitars. You know, we've tried arch tops, we've tried electric guitars, and you know, they're great guitars, but it's not what people want. You know, people want their acoustic guitar, their flat top acoustic guitar. Yeah. And I mean, there were some things that transferred over to dreadnoughts and other guitars from arch tops, like the hexagon fingerboard inlay from the F7 and F9. That moved over to the D45.
D45, yeah.
The head plate inlay, that moved over, because originally 45s would have a torch inlay and snowflakes on the fingerboard.
Okay.
And then the C2 inlay pattern from the top, when Martin could no longer get herringbone because of World War II, they started using that inlay pattern for style 28s.
Yeah.
So there were some important features that came from arch tops.
Gotcha.
But the sales just weren't there, or like I said, the materials and time they took to build were, you know, just a little bit too long.
Sure.
So in 1945, Frank Henry Martin retires. His son, C.F. Martin III, is running the company at that point. And you know, he's been involved with the company since he was a little kid. So, you know, talk about already has decades of experience. Yeah. And this is when you really see country and bluegrass explode. And then eventually you have rock and roll and folk. And the majority of those musicians were using Martin instruments. You know, you see like Hank Williams on the Grand Ole Opry using a Martin, or Bill Monroe. Then Elvis and Johnny Cash at Sun Studios using Martins. And then you get the Kingston Trio using Martins. And then, you know, Muddy Waters using a Martin to record his folk singer album. So it's like pretty much every genre of popular music, they were using Martins.
They had a decent run at that point.
Yeah, exactly. This is a cool guitar here. It was owned by a gentleman named Fred Clay, who was in a country band in Southern California. He happened to be a friend of Leo Fender's. So at the time, Leo Fender was building amps, PAs, and pedal steel guitars. Well, Fred had this 0018 and he took it into Leo's shop and said, you know what, nobody can hear me, can you help me out? So Leo Fender hooked up one of his pedal steel pickups to it, and this guitar is Leo Fender's first experiment on working on a fretted stringed instrument.
Wow. That's Leo's tinkering.
Yeah.
No kidding. He tried it, it looks like he tried it one way before he tried it the other, huh? Or
well, actually, yeah, there was control knobs in there.
Yeah, that's what I figure, yeah.
So I'm assuming there was probably a volume and tone control in here at
sure,
some point.
Sure.
And this is, you know, one of the pedal steel pickups that Fender was building and using.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he had to put the arch top style tailpiece on it. But, I mean, hopefully it served the purpose for Fred Clay because, you know, it doesn't look pretty, but if, you know, it helped him with the sound issue, I guess it was worth it. And
must have played it. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you know, Leo Fender worked on this guitar before he started building the Telecaster and then the Stratocaster. It's pretty wild.
This is why Martin is the American guitar company, you know?
In the late 1950s and early 1960s, Martin was having an issue with keeping up with demand. They were still at the North Street factory. I mean, it was expanded on how many, you know, probably like 8 or so times. It was 4 stories by that point, and they just couldn't keep up with it. If you would have went into a Martin dealer in 1960 and ordered a D28, they would have told you to come back in 3 years.
Wow.
That's how backordered they were.
Wow.
So that's when they decided, you know what, we need to move. We outgrew this building. So Chris Martin, he is our executive chairman and, you know, chairman of the board here at Martin Guitar. His father was working with the company, Frank Herbert Martin, and, you know, he really urged his father, C.F. Martin III, you know, we need to build something that's going to allow us to build more efficiently, someplace that's larger. Mm-hmm. So that's when the company breaks ground and then opens where we're at now, the Sycamore Street factory in 1964.
1964, okay.
Yep. And you can see the production totals go up from there. They went from building, you know, around 5,000 to 6,000 guitars a year at North Street to over 20,000 guitars a few years later here at Sycamore Street. Wow. A few years later, Martin realizes that, you know, vintage guitars, there's a huge market for them, especially pearl bordered guitars. Mm-hmm. So they get back into building D45s and, you know, all those pearl guitars, introduced the D41 just as an alternate to the D45. And, you know, around this time, late 60s, Summer of Love, Woodstock, a lot of those musicians are using Martin instruments.
Sure.
You know, the singer-songwriter movement. You know, folk music is still really big. We have a 1971 D1235 that was owned by Judy Collins. And she happened to play the opening ceremonies here at the Sycamore Street factory in 1964. Her and Tom Paxton. Now, when you talk about folk music, one of the biggest names of all time is Joan Baez. Mm-hmm. I mean, currently we're working on an exhibit dedicated to her artwork and a few of her guitars that are, you know, special pieces. It'll be open next week, nice. But that's just a little preview of what's going on here. But this is one of the guitars that's going to be in there. This is an 1880 single 040 that Joan owned in the late 1960s. Wow. So she was very fond of O-size, small body guitars. One of the coolest things about this guitar is it still has her set list on the side of it.
Unbelievable.
Playability-wise, I mean, I think this might be the easiest playing guitar in the museum.
Give a few strums on it?
Yeah. So after this, I'll probably just take out one more. Sure. Well, actually, I'll show you another guitar after that. I did my little, you know, preview of coming attractions thing, so I have to show you that one at the end.
That's an easy playing guitar.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
I mean, and it shows that, I mean, this guitar is X-braced. Even though it's from 1880, it would have been built for gut strings.
Yeah.
But you can put, you know, like an extra light set of steel strings on it.
Because of the X-bracing.
Yeah. Because when Martin first got into building X-brace guitars, they didn't really alter the braces until, you know, they made them a little bit heavier in the late 1920s, but the early steel string guitars they built just had, you know, X-bracing like this guitar would have. So if you use a light enough set of steel strings, it's not an issue.
That's so easy to play.
But as long as, yeah, the stipulation is the guitar has to be structurally sound, you know, that's one of the things you need to look at.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
That one's held up, huh?
Yeah. So after C.F. Martin III passes away, Chris Martin is voted by the board of directors to become CEO and chairman of the board. And at that point, you know, it's 1986, guitar sales had been slumping. You know, guitar sales are cyclical. They go along with, you know, what's popular in music.
Sure.
And late 70s, we're not kind to the guitar because of disco, and then in the 80s, electronic music. But
yeah.
Luckily for Chris and the company, in 1989, MTV unveiled their Unplugged program. And on Unplugged, they had performers playing acoustic music. So interest in acoustic music rose, and the instruments they were playing, and some of those key performers were Eric Clapton, playing his 1939 0042, and then Kurt Cobain, Nirvana. Kurt Cobain played a 1959 D18E on that show, and this happens to be Grandpa, Kurt Cobain's 1953 D18,
yeah. Wow.
the guitar he owned before he owned that 59. The story behind this guitar is it was owned by Mary Lou Lord, who was a musician from the Boston, Massachusetts area. And she became a Nirvana fan. You know, this is before they became this huge band that, you know, they were later in the 90s. So they had just released Nevermind, right before they became big. And so I guess she went to see him at a show. Her and Kurt became friends, started dating. She knew they were touring to support Nevermind, so they both loved this guitar. They nicknamed it Grandpa because it was old and beat up. And so she let him have it. And then he used it for a while and, you know, ended up giving it back to her. And then she let Elliott Smith use it for a while, and then ended up, you know, selling the guitar, and we ended up acquiring it. But, I mean, you know, this was owned by Kurt Cobain, you know, played by Kurt Cobain, and played by Elliott Smith. So, you know, some really great history with this guitar.
Unbelievable.
Can I play that first?
Oh yeah, definitely. What else are you gonna say? You got a chance to play Kurt Cobain's guitar. Nice, a southpaw like me.
Yeah. Isn't it surreal? It's like...
Josh?
They're brothers and they grew up in a Martin household.
Okay.
Dad had Martin, they all had Martins.
Cool.
Pretty wild, huh?
So, you've heard of Les Paul.
No.
I mean, most people identify Les Paul with the electric guitar, but I mean, Les Paul was an amazing musician. Definitely, you know, the work he did with recording equipment, you know, the guy was always tinkering with stuff. Well, this happens to be Les Paul's Martin. This was Les's first good guitar. He was around 15 when he got it. He was living in Waukesha, Wisconsin. And he would sneak out of his house to go see a local jazz musician. And he would write down on the napkin where he was playing. And that's where the fret numbers, he wrote those fret numbers there so that he could learn to play up the neck.
No kidding.
So this is on loan to us right now. There's a gentleman named Jimmy Wasaki who oversees Les's collection and has us, you know, let us use this guitar. It came into us little, you know, pretty rough shape, but our repair department did a great job of, you know, there was some separations, had to reset the neck and some things like that. But I mean, overall, when you talk about the history of guitars as we know it today, we have obviously Martin, we have Leo Fender, and we have Les Paul all combined here in our museum.
Unbelievable, yeah. I mean, like you said, you get there at the end, and there it is. I mean, this is why it's the, this is the American Guitar Company. You know, it's just, it all comes together, full circle. My goodness.
Now, if you want to strum that.
Sure. Les Paul's Martin. Wrap your head around that one. Les Paul's Martin with the fret markers. Wow. Too much.
I know.
Zach and I shot an outro at the museum for this experience, but I was so overcome with emotion that upon watching it back, I figured I'd relive this experience. I'd watch it with you, and then I'd come back to tell you what an amazing trip and experience that was. And unbelievable. Drop a comment and let me know your favorite guitar in the collection. I can't tell you what it was like to play this unbelievable collection, this historic collection. Everything from that unbelievable D45, the Holy Grail, to Kurt Cobain's grandpa, Martin D18, to the oldest guitar in the collection. I mean, you're talking about 190 years of history. Chris Martin IV is the great-great-great-grandson of Christian Martin. It's the oldest American guitar company that's family owned. It's the oldest American company that's family owned and the oldest string instrument manufacturer in the world. Unbelievable legacy from Martin Guitars, and you got to see and hear firsthand from Jason Ahner. Jason, thank you so much. Martin, thank you for teaming up with us to bring this exclusive look at the Martin Museum. And make sure you're subscribed to be in it to win it. We're giving away a D28. So subscribe now to win this beautiful guitar, D28, made at the Nazareth, Pennsylvania plant at Martin. And to be in it to win it, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and make sure you sign up using our Gleam entry link. That entry link is in the description. I am just still overcome with emotion from this entire experience. Drop a comment and let me know your favorite parts, and go back and watch, tell a friend, and be here for our factory tour. You can watch our Martin factory tour, an in-depth, long play look at the whole process behind building Martin guitars today. We love bringing this content to you. Hope you enjoyed this. See you on the next video. Take care.